In this video, you will learn how to pass the audio data to your shaders and how to use it to make cool looking effects in Unity, like this simple music visualizer. By the end of the video, you will be able to make your shader effects to interact with audio. For the tutorial, I'm using Unity 6 and my project is set up in URP. Alright, let's get started. Alright, so I have this scene. Now first let's create a quad. Then I don't need this collider, so let me remove it. Now if you watched the first episode of How to Write Shader series, I've told you that 99% of the time you can get away with Unity shader graph. Unfortunately, this scenario falls into that 1%, so we have to write the shader. And I'll tell you why in a bit, but first let's create a shader. So create shader, and let's go unlit shader. I'm going to call it music visualizer, and let's open up our shader. Alright, now we have the shader here. Now if you've never written any shaders in Unity before, I do have an entire video series about that. I recommend you go watch that first and then come back here, because here I'm going to go a little bit faster. Alright, so first I'm going to change the category to custom. Then I don't need this property for now. Yeah, this is all cool. And instead of CG program, I'll go HLSL program. Then, okay, these two names, I can work with them. So that's all cool. And then I don't need fog for now. And instead of including Unity CG, we will go packages / Unity render pipeline universal, then shader library and core.hsl. Then I like to call this app data attributes, so I'll rename it to attributes. Yeah, okay, no problem. Then I like to call this vertex position in local space. Okay, don't mind. Then I like to call this v2f structure varings. Yep. Then we don't need fog, so delete. And here I like to call this vertex position in clip space. And next, let's move it on top. Then we don't need this main texture and sampler. Then in the vertex shader, for our clip space position, simply go transform object to hclip. And then pass in our attributes position and local space. Then for the UV, simply use our attributes UVs. And again, I don't need fog, so let me remove it. Then for the fragment shader, instead of fixed 4, I'll simply go float 4. Then I like to call this integer in, so I'll simply rename it to in. Make sure you write capital I, because otherwise it will be a keyword. Then I don't need this. We don't need fog. And let's define a vector3 call for color. And for now, let's visualize our UV. So float3 input.uv and 0. And instead of returning call directly, I'll go float4, then my color, and the alpha, which will be 1 in this case. And then instead of NCG, I'll simply go NHLSL. Alright. Save. Okay, I have this shader. Now let's create material from that. Let's also call it music visualizer material. And I'm going to apply it onto this quad. And our shader is working. And you can see that for the UVs, I have origin 00 here, and it goes up to 11 here. Alright, now first I want to create multiple bars, and for that I'm going to create a new function which will return a float. I'm going to call it bars, and it will take our original UV as an input, and one float input for height, and then I'll simply go return step of uv.y and height, and the step function will basically go if this input is less than this edge value, we will get 0, otherwise we will get 1. So in this case, if I pass in height of 0.3, I will get white value from 0 up to 0.3, and then I will get black values above that. Okay, let's just simply call our function. So simply bars of our original UV and the height of 0.3. Okay, save, and let's head back to Unity. So you can see that our UV's y is 0 in the bottom, and it goes up to 1. So up to 0.3 I will have white values, and above that we will have black values. Now this is simply a single bar. I want multiple of them, and I want to control that from the inspector as well. So for that, I'm going to go up to this property block and going to define one property. So I'm going to go underscore bars, and let me put in the label of bar count, and its type will be integer, and let's set the default to 64. And this will simply create an input slot in the inspector. Our HLSL program doesn't know what this is, so let's define it here as well. And for that, let's make some room here, and here we should define it in a single C buffer block. So I'll go C buffer start, then unity per material, and C buffer end, and here I'll go float, pass in the exact name, bars. Yep. Then in my bars function, first I'm going to go multiply another step, and then let me add some tiny gaps. I'll go 0.2, and then my UV's X. So this will go if the UV's X value is less than this value, I'll get the black value at the left side, and at the right side I will have white value. So it will create a gap here. Okay, let's just save and see. So you can see that created a gap. Now this is single bar. We want multiple bars, so for that I'm simply going to multiply this X with my bars property. So now my UV's X will go from 0 up to 64, but what I want is I want this to go from 0 up to 164 times. So I can do that by simply going fraction of the entire thing, and fraction function will simply return the fractional part of a number. So if I pass in 10.03, it will return 0.03. Okay, let's save and see. So now I have 64 bars, and if you don't believe me, let me go and dial down the bar count to 5, and you can see that 1 2 3 4 5, we have 5 bars. So it's working. All right, now I have the bars, but I don't want them to be all white. I need to color them. So in my fragment shader here, I'll simply go col multiply equals float 3, and let me just pass in some random gradient color. So let's try sine of UV's X plus 0.02, and let's go cosine of UV's Y plus 2. And for the blue channel, I don't know, let's try 0.3. Let's save and see. Yep. Okay, I think this is a nice color, but anyways, you can always tweak this. Okay. Alright, now that's it for our shader for now. Alright, now in Unity I have this audio file which has 2 channels. Let's just play it. And to use this, first let's create an audio source in our scene. Okay. Let me also call it music visualizer. And for the audio resource, simply assign our audio file. Then let me check this loop property so it will loop continuously, and make sure you set the play on awake to true. So as soon as I hit play, audio starts playing. And yeah, that's pretty much for our audio source. And now we have to read the frequency data from this audio and pass into our shader. And for that, we have to write a C# script. So I'll go create mono behavior script. And let me call it, I don't know, music visualizer controller. And now Unity will compile it, so we have to wait. Okay, it finally compiles. Let's assign it to our music visualizer and then double click to open our script. In the script, first let's grab the material reference. I'll simply go serialize field so we can access it from the inspector, then go private material. Yeah, that's fine. Then in Unity, select our music visualizer, and there we have this material slot. Let's assign our music visualizer material there. Then in our script, we also need the audio source reference, and for that, I'll go private audio source. Let's also call it audio source. And in the awake method, let's grab the reference for that. So I'll go audio source equals get component of audio source. And now to read the audio data, I'm going to create a float array. So here, let's go private float array. Let's call it data for now. And in the awake method, I'm going to initialize it. So data equals new float array with the size of 256. And this basically defines the sample size you want to read at any given point. Also, you have to make sure that the array size is power of 2, so 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, etc. Also, this array size must be greater than 64 and should be less than 8192. And now I think I will be in the way, so let's just open this Explorer so you can see better the code. And now here, let's go update. In the update method, we will populate our array with the audio samples. And for that, audio source has a nice method called get spectrum data. That was the first one. And then we have to pass in our array, so data, which will be populated. Then we have to pass in the channel, left or right, or 1 or 2. So let's pass in the first channel. And then we have to pass in the FFT window type, which basically means how you want to read the audio samples, or how you want to access the audio frequency. And let's use Blackman. It doesn't really matter. So once this line executes, we will have data in our data array. Now we have to pass that array data to our shader. And there we have a problem. So let me head back to my shader. So in Shader Lab, there is no way to define float array in the properties block. So I can't define that property here. Fortunately, this property block is only there so we can access the property from the inspector. The actual properties are defined in the HLSL blocks. So in the C buffer block, I'll simply go float array. Sorry, here I have to go float of frequency. Let's call the data frequency. And I have to assign the length of the array here as well. So again, 256. All right, now that I have float array in my shader, let's simply copy this name, head back to our C# script, and then I'll simply go material dot set float array, then my variable name, which was frequency, and then I have to pass in the data. And just like that, we can pass the array data to our shader. In the shader, we don't have to define the property in the property block. And a lot of people don't know about this. So if you knew, let me know in the comments. And that was the reason we have to write the shader, because in shader graph, there is no way that you can define float array. At least I don't know any way to do it. Alright, now that we have our audio data in our shader, instead of statically defining this 0.3 height to all our bars, let's sample our array, or actually let's access our array. So for that, I'm going to go float h for height equals, let's go frequency, and then I have to pass the index to read the data. And for that, I'm simply going to use my UV's x multiply my bars. By the way, I'm carelessly writing like this, but you have to make sure that this bars value don't exceed the array size, otherwise it will return an error. And here this value will go from 0 up to 64, but this is an index, so it will be automatically converted to int. So it will go from 0 up to 63 for all of these bars. And just like that, we have a different frequency in this h for every bar. Then instead of passing this 0.3 statically, I'm simply going to pass h. Let's save and head back to Unity, and let's just play. And yep, our shader is working correctly. But now what I want is, I want this bar to be in the middle, and I want them to go in both up and down direction. So let's just stop. And in the shader, in the bar function, let's simply modify our UVs. So for UVs y, I'm going to go minus equals 0.5. By doing this, it will go from negative 0.5 to positive 0.5. And I want that to go from -1 to 1. So instead of going minus equals, I'll simply go uv.y minus 0.5. Wrap the entire thing in the brackets and simply go multiply 2. So with this, my UV's y will go from -1 to 1. And basically what I want is, I want to reflect the top part and the bottom. So here I also want positive values. And for that, I can simply use absolute of this. Okay, let's save and see. Okay, it will be weird, but let's just play. So now I have my bars in the middle, and the top part is reflecting at the bottom as well. Now you can see that here I don't see any bar. That's because this h value is 0 there. So let's simply add some minor value on top. Let's save and see. That's too big, I think, but let's see. Yeah, that's too big. So instead of 0.1, I'll simply go 0.2 maybe. Again, too big. Again, this is a tweaking part, so feel free to tweak to your heart's content. There we have a nice music visualizer. I hope you can take it from here. For example, with box SDF, you can make this effect glow. With circle SDF, you can get something like this. And if you made it this far, hit that like button. If you're new here, subscribe, and if you wish to support me, take a look at my Patreon. That's it from me, and I'll see you in the next one.